In last week's learning, we focused on Ellul, the concept of change, what it means to change during Ellul, focusing on the greatness that we have within. But now it's 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. We're right there. We're right there. So tonight's learning is going to be a little bit more focused on Rosh Hashanah and what the day of Rosh Hashanah is about. And the frightening thing is that one can go through their entire life, a pious, focused, dedicated Jew who wants to do the right thing, who wants to serve Hashem in the right way, can go through a whole life and completely miss the boat on Rosh Hashanah. And it's important as we come closer to Rosh Hashanah to really ask ourselves what Rosh Hashanah is all about. And the reason why often people miss the boat on Rosh Hashanah is because we know Rosh Hashanah is obviously the Yom Hadin. Everyone knows what those words mean. Yom, the day, Hadin of judgment. And we know that we're writ, right? The Svarim, the Talmud, our sages, Jewish tradition teach us that on Rosh Hashanah we're judged for the year. Are we going to live? Are we going to die? Is it going to be a good year? Is it going to be a bad year? So immediately, once you hear that, so now it's like this fear, this anxiety kicks in. Oh my God, right? The whole year is being judged on this one day. And because of that, we immediately go into like panic zone, and immediately our focus becomes, okay, Hashem, here's my shopping list. I need this, 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 right? And that's what Rosh Hashanah becomes. And because of that, instead of it, we talk about it being a sweet new year, but it often lacks its sweetness. It becomes a day that has so much anxiety and panic. And certainly that's not the intention of what Rosh Hashanah is supposed to be. And the truth is, many of you might have felt this in the past. I certainly feel it every year. And I'm going to go on a limb and guess that you feel this also, that there is somewhat of a paradox within Rosh Hashanah. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that? There's somewhat of this paradox where it presents itself as a Yom Tov. We have this beautiful festive meal, and there is a sense we're supposed to feel a certain aspect of joy, but yet there's what's called Eimas Hadin, the fright of the fact that we're being judged, and how do we juggle these two things? Do you feel that? Do you ever feel that in Rosh Hashanah? You're like, okay, I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to feel right now. You know, there's a famous Hasidic story, famous Hasidische Maisa, as they say, a Hasidic story of this, and many Hasidic stories, by the way, if you're familiar somewhat, when Hasidus first started, so there was a tension between Hasidic groups and non-Hasidic groups because of the different ways of practice. So the story is perhaps an anecdotal story. Are you allowed to fear Rosh Hashanah? It's a great question from number 9, Deborah. I don't know how to properly pronounce your name. I'm not even going to bother. But it's a great question, right? So this anecdotal story is where this fellow who's not part of this Hasidic group ends up, whatever, he's on a road trip and he gets stuck in a Hasidic town on Rosh Hashanah. And he's there for the evening services, and he participates in the evening services with this Hasidic community. And immediately afterwards, after they finish, they all get up, they lock arms, and they start dancing on Rosh Hashanah. Right? And they're dancing, and it's festive, and it's joyous. And this fellow who's not from this community, he's looking on in shock, and he's like, what are they doing? It's Rosh Hashanah. What a disgrace to Rosh Hashanah. They should be in awe. They should be in fear, right? They should be, how is it possible that they could sit and they can dance? And one of the Hasidim sees, he's sitting on the side, he's looking in a bad mood, he's all grumpy, he's horrified by what he's seeing. What is this joy? What is this frivolousness, this levity that we're seeing on Rosh Hashanah? And this Chassid goes over to him and sits down next to him, and he says, listen, it could be for you that you're so confident in your actions, you're so confident in your merit, and you believe that you can sit in solitude and enter into the book of life. But for us, Hasidim, we know that none of us on our own, we don't have the merit, right? We're on our own, we're not destined to be written in the book of life. All we have is the ability to dance our way together into the book of life. We can do it together. We can do it with joy. So there is this sort of tension. There's always been this tension as to how to properly feel on Rosh Hashanah. And part of that comes from the fact that we're not necessarily fully aligning ourselves with what Rosh Hashanah should be, what it's all about. Because yes, it is a day of din. It is a day of judgment. But whose job is that? That's God's job. What's our job? Well, we got to look in the prayers. Do you know how much of Rosh Hashanah prayer is actually designated to asking for things? Do you know? None of it. None of it. Rosh Hashanah prayer is not about asking for anything. There are certain things that were inserted later on, right? Zachreinu l'chaim. Zachreinu l'chaim, melech hafetz b'chai. There are certain things we say, but those are things that are inserted later. That's not part of the heart of prayer. We're very familiar with the fact that we cry during Unisana Tokef, one of the most passionate parts during Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, Unisana Tokef, who by fire and who by water and who by hurricane and who by this and who by that. My gosh, and every single year, it's like, it's crazy how every single year, like, you think about certain things and you're like, remember a couple of years back when you said like, mi ba magefa, who by plague? And you're like, plague, like we haven't had one of those in a while, and then boom, like what are you going to be thinking about this coming year? Unfortunately, it's hard to say. It's hard to say, but there's going to be parts of Unisana Tokef that you never paid attention to. That this year, when you're going to hear those words, you're going to be thinking about. We don't have to bring it up, right? This tragedy and that tragedy and tragedies that we've had in the last couple of months that we've never seen before. So it pulls on our heartstrings. But remember, Unisana Tokef was written hundreds of years later. So when we get down to the core, the actual core of what Rosh Hashanah is all about, as far as we're concerned, our avoda, our focus, our intention on Rosh Hashanah isn't about us being judged. That's what God is doing. What are we supposed to be doing? That's a question that we have to ask ourselves. And in the learning tonight, what you're going to explore together is to understand Rosh Hashanah, what it is, what is the essence of the day of Rosh Hashanah? What is Rosh Hashanah all about? How do we set our intention that we are aligning ourselves with what Rosh Hashanah should be for us? Because if we do that, then you don't have to think about God judging you. That's going to happen on its own. That's God's business. We have to be doing what we're supposed to be doing. And what that is, that's going to be the subject of tonight's learning. All right, welcome back, everybody. Did you get through the sheet? There was a lot there. Some people got through it. All right.
No.
A lot to think about. The other day, I think it was Sunday. It was Sunday when I was still in Colorado. So I took some of my kids to Avon, Colorado. You've been to Avon, Colorado? Beautiful Avon, Colorado, and we were walking towards a park and we passed the library and my kids wanted to go in the library, which I didn't know libraries are open on Sunday. Aren't libraries not supposed to be open on Sundays? I'm like, it's not open. And my son was like, no, they think it's open. So we went into the library and they have a really fun library over there. So the kids were running around and playing with the little, computers and looking at the books. So I figured, I'll drift off and I'll try while they're doing their thing to try to find a book. I don't go to libraries that often. Most of the books that I have, have in my house. So it's been a while. So I'm sort of perusing through the nonfiction section and I didn't recognize a lot of the books. But then this book that I did recognize, because I'm very, very familiar with the author Eckhart Tolle. Everyone knows Eckhart Tolle, right? Some of you know Eckhart Tolle, fascinating author. He wrote the famous book called The Power of Now. This was another book of his. So I pulled it off the shelf, something to sort of look through while my kids are doing their thing. And I saw that in the book, he had a whole section on moving sort of beyond your ego. And I was looking through for a very short time. We weren't there for that long. And I felt like maybe the whole thing was orchestrated by Hashem. Not maybe, I'm sure the whole thing was orchestrated by Hashem. Because I saw something that was such a beautiful quote. And I want to share it with you and then tie it into what we just learned. I'm going to read it to you because I still haven't yet. I'm still working on embedding it into my brain that I shouldn't have to read it. But listen to this quote. The quote goes, "Whenever you completely accept a loss," He was speaking about a story about a woman that he was counseling, and she lost an object that was very near. She was very, very sick, and her life was drifting away. But she thought it was stolen. She lost an object that was very personal and sentimental to her, and she lost it. And she had to accept this loss at this sort of vulnerable place in her life. And he writes, whenever you completely accept a loss, you go beyond ego, and the quote unquote I am, which is consciousness itself, emerges. You hear that? Again, whenever you completely accept a loss, you go beyond ego, and the quote unquote I am, which is consciousness itself, emerges. Meaning like this, all of us, we want to get in touch with who we really are, with our core, with our neshama, with our essence. However, it's very hard to do that. Why? Because we naturally attach ourselves to things, to stuff. Whether it's material possession, whether it's our bodies, whether it's our emotions, whether it's our thoughts, whether it's other people. But our whole life, we define ourselves by the things that we attach ourselves to and make part of our identity. And sometimes in order to access the quote unquote I am, a person's essence, or as we would say in our tradition, a person's neshama, how do you access it? If I would tell you right now, right, Caroline, feel your neshama. By the way, I picked Caroline because I don't see her on my screen. Caroline's like in the kitchen now. She's ready to like run back. But right, if I'd say, you know, if I would say, right, access your neshama, it's very hard because we identify with so many things. And sometimes the way to access something that's difficult to touch, that's difficult to feel, is not by reaching for that thing directly, but negating the things that we have accidentally replaced that thing with. So sometimes when a person suffers a loss, it's through dealing with the disassociation with that thing that now suddenly they recognize the real I am, the real consciousness, who they really are. I thought that was a very, very powerful idea. So in the learning, the question is, what book was that quoted from? He has a book, I believe it's called The New Earth or something like that. I don't know 100%. I believe it might be called The New Earth. So what we learned right now in the packet, something wonderful. We said earlier, right? How do you define the essence of Rosh Hashanah? What is the essence of Rosh Hashanah? The essence of Rosh Hashanah is about getting back to that core. Danielle mentioned early on that I recently wrote a book. And part of my goal in writing the book, which is called The 4 Elements of an Empowered Life, is to show that the 4 elements that are part of our lower soul, our nefesh, what's called the nefesh habahamis, the animalistic soul, we have these 4 elements that we struggle with. All of our mission in life is to try to turn ourselves into a vessel for that higher soul called the neshama, that essence that I am. It's an amazing thing on Rosh Hashanah. It's the only mitzvah, unless you can tell me another one that I'm not familiar with, but it's the only mitzvah that we do with our breath. It's blowing the shofar. It's blowing the shofar, right? And we know the power of breath. We know that all of meditation has to do with breath, but we know that the Hebrew word for breath is neshima, which is the same as neshama, the same as our soul. So that means that metaphorically, when we're doing this mitzvah of blowing the shofar, what is it? We take a shofar, we take this horn, which is just hollow, and we blow into it. And metaphorically, the symbolism of that is that what we're trying to do on Rosh Hashanah, the essence of the day, is to make ourselves hollow. So that just like in the beginning of time, just like Adam and Chava, the primordial man was completely hollow, and Hashem blew into him, Vayipach ba'ap of nishmas chayim. God blew into him the breath of life, that very first act of blowing, that very first nishima. The very, very first shofar was Adam himself, Adam himself. It's It's one of the reasons why it says when Yaakov, Jacob, our forefather, patriarch Jacob, it says that his beauty was like the beauty of Adam, but the term that our sages use is ke'ein shufrei de Adam Rishon. It was like the chauffeur of Adam Rishon, the beauty of Adam Rishon. What was the beauty of Adam Rishon? The very fact that he was so hollow, he wasn't attached to anything. It was just God's breath flowing through him. On Rosh Hashanah, our job is to let go of everything material and just allow ourselves to become like the chauffeur, to allow Hashem to just blow our essence back through us, to blow to blow that breath of life, that nishmas chaim through us, which is a very, very powerful idea. You know, something very interesting. I always love the chauffeur sounds. Someone's asking over here, why the 1, 3, or 9 blasts on the shofar? Well, I'll tell you this. When the Torah refers to the shofar blast, so what is the term? What is the name of the shofar blast that the Torah uses? We have a couple of different ones, but what is the term that the Torah uses?
Teruah, no? Teruah?
So someone wrote Tkiya and somebody wrote Teruah.
Teruah.
So the Torah uses the term Teruah. It is Yom Zichron Teruah. No problem. Apology accepted. It's the day of blowing the Teruah. What does the word Teruah mean? So whenever we want to identify a word, we always look at the shoresh, the root of the word. What is the root of the word Teruah? So you see 2 letters that are right there at its core, and that is the resh and the ayin. Now, if you would take the letters resh and ayin, what does that spell?
Ra.
Somebody said what?
Ra.
I heard 2 things. Somebody said ra, and somebody said rea.
Rea. No?
So now, listen, everyone, listen to what just happened. I gave you 2 letters, a resh and an ayin. And somebody said ra, which means, well, you typically translate as evil or bad. Somebody else said rea, friend. Now, again, we know that the Hebrew language is so accurate, so specific, so direct, so deliberate. Isn't that very interesting that we have a word at the core of Teruah, one that means friendship, v'ahavta l'reyacha kamocha, and one that was translated, at least over here, as bad or evil. How could that be the same word? How is it possible that it's the same word? By the way, there's one other word that is with the letters resh and ayin. Anyone know what else?
Roa.
Roa Hashem roi lo echsar, which means a shepherd. What does shepherd, evil, and friendship all have in common that they all share the same word? The answer is that they're all born out of brokenness. We know that there's evil. Evil exists in the world because of the brokenness. God created a world that was deliberately broken so we could fix it. Why do you have friends? Why do we need friends? Why do we need the comfort of somebody else? If Hashem made all of us perfect, we wouldn't need companionship. We need companionship because we're all beautifully a little bit broken. So we look for friendship to sort of fill us up, to help complete the pieces. I can only stick to you. We can only stick together as pieces of the puzzle because every puzzle piece is slightly broken. A shepherd is someone that brings together a flock. In fact, the very word teruah, which is this teruah blast, in one place, if you look at the translation in Parshas Bamidbar, when it says utruas melech bo, it's the king's friendship. If you look what it means in the book of Tehillim, Psalms, teroim b'shevet barzel, break them like with an iron rod. So the word teruah itself can be found sometimes as being friendship, or it can mean brokenness. Because that defines everything that's happening in this world. Our whole mission in this world is about picking up those broken pieces. Your soul, every single one of our neshamas, is the most whole and beautiful thing that there is. So we come from this place of wholeness. And that's that first tkiya. That one long whole sound. It's complete, it's straight, it's simple. And then we go into the teruah, a broken sound, because that's us coming into this world, into this place of brokenness. And we're here when we're trying to pick up the pieces. And then when we return our souls on the other side, it's not only is it a tekiah, but it's a tekiah gedola. It's an even longer tekiah. It shouts out again. It's back to the wholeness. Because our soul goes through those three stages: tekiah, teruah, tekiah. Wholeness, brokenness, and even a stronger wholeness on the other side. By the way, the other sound, which is the shvarim, what is shaver? Brokenness. Broken. By the way, how do you say a birth if you go back in the Torah, Parsha Shemos, right? When it says that the Jews gave birth on a birthing stone, what is that called? A mashbir. Birth is also shever, also brokenness. Fascinating. All of these sounds have this dual meaning of being both wholeness as well as brokenness, because that's our journey in this life. So we have this mitzvah of blowing the shofar that totally defines the essence of the day. This is the day that Hashem blew the nishmas chaim, the soul of life, into Adam. And we do that same thing. We blow our essence, our neshima, our neshama, our soul into this shofar, but specifically with that same motion of wholeness and then brokenness and then even a greater wholeness on the other side. To show that over here on the day of Rosh Hashanah, what are we trying to do? We're trying to let go of all of the other things that we're attached to and try to get down to our essence. We learned over there in the pages that there's a question as to exactly what day the world was created. But if you take a look at the very first word in the Torah, what is it? Bereshis. And Bereshis has the very same letters as Aleph B'Tishrei, the first of Tishrei. That means that on the day of Rosh Hashanah, the day which is the first of Tishrei, we're getting back to Bereshis. We're getting back to that very, very first beginning. And in Kabbalah, it says that the same way the 10 utterances correspond to the 10 Kabbalistic Sefirot, the very first word in the Torah, Bereshis, corresponds to that highest Sefirah, the Sefirah of Keter, of crown, of God's pure desire. That means that what are we trying to get in touch with when we're trying to emulate God in Rosh Hashanah? We're trying to strip away everything. We're not our possessions. We're not our body. We're not our emotions. We're not our thoughts. We're not our ego. We're purely a soul. And we allow ourselves to become hollow vessels, shofars, to allow God to blow his desire through us. And I want to end with one last thing, because I want to wish everyone a ksiva v'chasima tova. May you be written and sealed in the book of life. But it's interesting. Somebody pointed this out. Most of us, we say these words, ksiva v'chasima tova, may you be written and sealed in the book of life. But many of us have already written the script. We're just presenting it to God. We're just like, God, I wrote the script, and I'd like you to sign off on it, if that's okay. When we wish someone a ksiva v'chasima tova, may you be written and sealed in the book of life, what we're really saying is, let God write the script. Let God write the script. This Rosh Hashanah, don't come with the script. Come as a shofar. Come hollow. Come as an empty vessel. And ksiva v'chasima tova. Let God write the script. Let God seal it. Because God's divine wisdom completely puts ours to shame. And as long as we can give ourselves over to Hashem on Rosh Hashanah, we know that we're doing our part, and we can truly enter the day not with panic, not with anxiety, but with the true simcha that Rosh Hashanah deserves. So on that note, thank you all for joining, and wishing everybody a real, true ksiva v'chasima tova.